This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi, and welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host, David Charlton. So today we're going to be touching on a subject which has been discussed with guests on a variety of podcast episodes, and it's about flow or getting in the zone. Where in the previous episodes, we've literally just scratched the surface. We've chatted for a few minutes or so about these different topics and how they actually mentally prepare themselves and how they go on to find the zone. Today is a little bit different, where my two guests, Sun and Ed, the owners of Rewire Fitness, go on to spend the entire episode talking about flow and the zone. And I think you'll agree, being in the zone, having that peak performance state, it's a great place to be. And we're going to discuss different ways that you can go on to find this and a whole lot more. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Sun, Ed. It's great to have you on the show today. Sun, could we start with yourself? Would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about your background and your interest in sport and the psychological part to sport?
Absolutely, David. Yeah, pleasure to be on. I'm excited to chat. Yeah, a little bit of background about myself. So I grew up in Boulder, Colorado in the States, which is a hub for endurance sports. And not surprisingly, I got involved in cycling at a very early age, worked my way up to an elite level over about 15 years. Many athletes. I had sort of a perfectionist mindset, sort of always thought more was more, and eventually sort of dug myself into a hole and retired early from burnout and injury. From there, I found that I had a natural talent in product development, software technology. I built my career in New York, building a wide variety of products, but stayed very close to performance and the science. And really those two passions came together when there was a particular branch of science that was newly established around resilience training. Was waiting for it to come to market. It never did. And so sort of that know-how that I had built over the years around technology coming together to build a solution to bring that science to market, the inspiration, and getting together with Ed, also a pretty cool story. We were able to really make it happen and bring what we consider elite tools to athletes and coaches around the world.
That's great. I've made a note of a few little points there for us to go back to in a moment. We'll hand it over to Ed though, and again, if you can just share your background there, Ed.
Yeah, of course. So like Sun, been a lifelong athlete. Grew up playing a lot of rugby, massive part of my childhood and still today, really. Loving playing it. One day when I was about 13, got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which was a big hit. I had to sort of reset, learn how to do, control blood glucose levels, optimize them for performance. And that ultimately got me very interested in sports science and how can we optimize ourselves for performance. So went through, first of all, blood glucose levels, optimizing that, then looking at nutrition, recovery, training, really nerding out on it all, and ultimately looking at the sort of mind and how we can optimize our mind for performance, which just felt like an incredibly untapped area. We always say the mind's an incredibly important part of performance, but how much do we actually do to support it, to train it, to recover it? That's developed a huge area of interest around that. Go to Loughborough University to study sport and exercise science, which is like this kind of in the same way Colorado is in the States, just this hub of athletes. They say if it was in the Olympics, this small sort of 20,000 person town would be 15th in the Olympic medal table above the likes of like Germany, South Africa, etc. So, massive sports town. And that just really flourished my love even more for sports science. And yeah, then met up with Sun. We got building this. It's been an interesting few years, really diving into it deep. Yeah, really proud of what we built and just rolling it out now.
Do you want to just tell the listeners a bit more about the last few years? You say it's been interesting. Is your mental toughness, resilience, mental fitness, has that been tested?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the startup life's definitely an interesting one, but we've done something pretty awesome, which is basically create a new field around sort of training mental fitness through technology. And with that comes a lot of sort of pioneering in terms of educating people, but also creating a usable product that transfers the science into a tool that athletes everywhere can find accessible and easy to use. in the lab when they were doing, part of our system on NeuroTrain part, they were tying keyboards to bikes, and how accessible is that? And sort of creating that UI layer on top and making it as easy and accessible as possible, sort of transferring that science over to usable technology has been a big part of the last couple of years, which is definitely a challenge in itself. Yeah.
So you mentioned there about mental fitness. Just wondering, what would your definition of mental fitness be?
Yeah, similar to the fitness for the body, right? We want to focus on tools that are going to bring well-being and balance, put you in a good position to make good decisions and deal with the complexities of life and sport. So really, it's a combination of, adding enough stimuli for growth in terms of resilience, but also managing that cognitive fatigue, because that builds up over time. We're very focused as athletes on recovering the body. Now it's very well understood that, the gains you get are from your recovery phases, not when you're actually in the gym. So it's super important to think about that from the mind perspective, because you just have so much cognitive load built up from stress and sport. And so that needs to be unloaded and managed. We're really thinking of things holistically from that standpoint.
And I'm guessing for yourself, you talked about being a cyclist, and perfectionism was one of your traits. More was more, you said. So yeah, had you known a lot of this stuff a few years ago, I'm guessing it would have been like very, very helpful for you.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the combination of self-care, which, there's simple ways to build that into a lifestyle. That certainly is very helpful. And then also holistically understanding where you're at each day. We have some great tools and technology for understanding our physiology from day to day. Obviously, we can monitor sleep. We can track our heart rate data, particularly HRV, as we respond to training load, many other tools and trackers. But the blind spot is the cognitive side. So particularly if you have that kind of perfectionist mindset and, it's never enough, we're going to keep overloading your cognitive state. And pretty soon that'll result in a decline in performance. And so if I had those tools, I certainly would have been better off. But it is, I'm a recovering perfectionist, as I like to say. It is a process. It doesn't happen overnight.
Do you think then being a perfectionist will have a big influence on whether you can actually reach that peak performance state? If so, why is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things that's a blessing and a curse in a way. Where I found that over the years in sport, where I actually had the best performances, where I backed off a little bit, where I felt like I was not trying as hard as I thought I should, and I actually did better. So there's this, diminishing returns as it relates to pushing yourself. At some point, the adaptation or the grit that you gain from being relentless starts to have a negative impact. Whereas that line changes for any person in their individual lifestyle. So while it can result in performance, it can also result in crashing and burning. Like when we look at the top characteristics for burnout, number one is perfectionism. And also in the list is that sort of unidimensional conceptualization of yourself as an athlete, right? If that's your whole identity and you need to be perfect, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, there's the danger there of taking yourself too seriously, isn't there? And taking the sport too seriously in some respects. You lose your sense of humor on the field, track, or wherever it is.
Indeed, yeah. The joy of it, the fun of it, why you started in the first place.
Yeah, would one of you just like to explain, what a flow state is and what that looks and feels like?
Being the endurance athlete that I still am today, I would probably say I was in flow state thousands of times, and particularly unique experience because there's sort of this time shift that happens. So particularly in sport, it's almost like you have all the time in the world to make quick decisions, and your mind is calm and your awareness is expanded. So you may be more aware of finer details of what the other player is doing or what the other athlete is doing, of your environment, and you have the time you need to process it. The interesting thing is that even though it feels like that, it's sort of a lower level of cognition because your mind is actually quieter, but you're somehow perceiving more and somehow more capable. You have all the time in the world. A couple of years ago, I was in this race and we're going down this really rough section. The guy in front of me hit this rock and started to flip over. So as he was flipping over in the air, I was heading towards that same rock. Meanwhile, there was somebody right behind me, and I didn't know where he was going to land, because if he landed where I was going to go to avoid the rock, I would smash into him. So I had to simultaneously navigate the terrain, predict where he was going to go, and avoid the person behind me crashing into me. And it literally felt like one of those movies where you see the martial artist jump up in the air in slow motion. Everything just slowed down. And without thinking, I threaded the needle through all of that and got out. It's an amazing experience when you have it. You don't always have it. And there's lots of different kinds of flow triggers. In that case, it was a fight or flight trigger that got me. But it was cool. It's a special place to be in when you can get there.
Yeah, without doubt. Yeah, we can all benefit from being in that state as much as we possibly can. I've got the book Flow Fundamentals out in front of me, and just a few words there you talked about. What one thing it says here is about the transformation of time, and yeah, you touched on that. It just feels quite endless, and you do have a lot more time when you're in different situations. I completely agree with that one. The other thing is you almost have that sense of control, don't you, over your mind and your body.
Yeah, in some ways, it's like you're detached a little bit. We like to, in the system that we develop, we like to call it a calm, ready state. If you have a lot of anxiety and you're thinking of future and past scenarios, it's actually very hard to be in the present moment. And it's kind of the worst condition to be in a flow state or a flow trigger. Whereas if you're calm, maybe even a little bit curious, let's say homeostasis from an emotional standpoint, you can let that experience happen and really take advantage of it. So it's interesting, sort of what can trigger it and what can sort of not create the right environment. Because I think it is ultimately, it's a very deep biological survival mechanism. And I think as humans, we're all capable of it, but we've sort of, in this modern world, we've lost track of how to get there. If you look at like an animal running through a forest, they're in that state, they're in that present moment. They're not thinking about their text message and their Instagram post and all those things. Like, I think we all innately have the ability. It's just, how can we get out of our own way and experience it?
No, I tend to agree. I sometimes, when I'm talking to clients, look at it where you may have a trust mindset. When you really trust your skills, essentially, you react to situations, you're non-judgmental, you're not getting caught up in, as you say, past or future. So you're not overanalyzing things too much, trying to think. Then also when you're in critical situations, people can sometimes get drawn into trying to force the issue and force things to happen. If you really trust yourself and you're in that flow state, in a way you just back off, as you talked about earlier, and you essentially you let things happen. Yeah, there's so many different ways to be able to get into that type of state. I'd be interested on your take on that. Yourselves, how do you help people in that respect?
Yeah, I think part of it as well is just creating that sort of environment where you can get into that state. You're not going to be able to get into a flow state if you're getting your phone's blinking away, you're getting tons of texts, or maybe even you've got music on in some capacity. Like, these distractions from around are going to limit your ability to get into that state. Some of the times I've been able to really get into that is just on a run, completely hands-free, nothing on me, not even checking a watch or anything like that, just completely focused on one single task. And maybe some can dive into some of the sort of triggers we've built into the app as well, and things like that.
That sounds good. We'll just talk a little bit about this in a bit more depth, where people can often get quite self-conscious, can't they, when they perform. Their expectation levels are, I suppose, way out of sync, where they're mind reading other people, be it coaches, parents, teammates, opposition. And that obviously can take them away from being able to access the state. Again, do you guys want to share a little bit about that, and when you may have been guilty of falling into that trap?
Yeah, it's I come from more of a team sport background. That's a huge part of it. I always used to have the best games when I'd have no one watching me. And I just heard the same story from a basketball player the other day. She was telling me that, the second someone came to watch her, she just completely dropped off the second she noticed them in the crowd. So those sort of external eyes on you have a huge impact on ability to execute, but ultimately getting into that calm, ready state that Sun mentioned is really what allows us to get around that, focus on the task at hand, not overly aroused. I think, I come from a rugby background. One of the most interesting things about rugby is the sort of balance in arousal levels you need to achieve. And you've got this kind of high intensity physical side of it in tackles and in, you know, contact situations, but you've also got this endurance component and also skill component that sort of needs this complete balance in arousal levels, and external factors can always influence that. So getting into that calm, ready state pre-game and then maintaining that throughout is just an essential part of performance, really.
Yeah, I suppose, in rugby, if you get over aroused on occasions, then you may lose your discipline. And when you see the handbags coming out, and then likewise, if you're under aroused, then you're going to lack that intensity on you to be able to tackle fiercely, to run with the ball really hard and things like that.
Exactly, and it's so easy to flick from one to the other. And, you know, going into a state of over arousal, and then, you know, you're only focused on sort of just making hits you don't need to make, and not sort of stay in this calm, controlled mindset. Naturally has an impact on your skill level as well. If you're completely over aroused and off the chart, it's going to be much harder to make those you know, split second decisions, handling decisions, and things like that ultimately impact the overall game performance. I remember one game in particular I'm not overly proud about, but I'd have like someone had annoyed me a little bit in a ruck of, you know, whatever they're doing, gouging your eyes or something like that. I didn't think it was a very nice thing, but then literally the next 10 minutes I was just focused on smacking this guy as hard as I could in a tackle, driving him back 10 meters in a ruck completely unnecessarily, and lifting up and slamming him down. Like, not proud of it, but that's sort of what happens when you go over the edge. And just the importance of staying in that calm, controlled state, ready to perform, ready to execute in a sort of controlled mindset.
I'm chuckling as you say that, because it's taken me back quite a few years from when I was a child. So I think I probably stopped playing rugby when I was about 18. I used to play for the school team at the time, and there was one situation where, as a forward, I got blocked off illegally about 3 or 4 times. Where I was trying, I think it was in a line-out situation where I was trying to get to be able to tackle a scrum half or the standoff, and the referee never blew at all. Just remember scoring a try, and I should never have done this, but I did. I scored a try, and then I just ran back and basically was gloating to the guy who kept blocking us off.
Yeah,
He wasn't looking, and give him a nice elbow to the face. And I was actually a very calm and cool customer normally, but this guy got under my skin and certainly took me away from that flow state.
So easy as well, especially in a physical game like that, where, you know, someone hits you in the wrong way, gives you a bit of backtrack, and then your physical efforts are entirely focused on making it as unpleasant as possible for them in particular.
Most definitely. I'm not proud of that one.
I remember all the ones that I'm not that proud of, but that's just one example of them.
Yeah. So kids, if you're listening, just rewind and delete that little section.
I mean, you know, around that though, there were some sort of triggers I did sort of implement to allow me to bring back focus onto what was important. And it was as simple as just having little like cues, like clicking my fingers in a certain way and tapping my leg, that would just sort of allow you to regain focus and, you know, almost a trigger for what I actually wanted to achieve, a reminder of what was actually important.
It's true. That is, like, as you said, I suppose it's very personal to everyone. But yeah, clicking your fingers. I know you hear in some sports like wristbands or even elastic bands you might put on your wrist, little things like that. Yeah, do you want to explain a little bit more about other triggers that you may have in your app there, or just provide some insights for the listeners?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So other tools and techniques, some very popular in sports psychology, others pretty unique straight out of the lab. So we do have ways to program self-talk, which is really nice technique, maybe a short phrase, let's say calm and focused, you know, that will cue up your mindset. So if it's something that you need to get into a certain state and you practice using that phrase, those words have meaning and have an impact. And that's something you can pull out whenever you need to. In the app, you can program it and practice it. Of course, visualization, super helpful in sport. But then some other techniques, you know, if you have a high amount of arousal or you have a level of anxiety, certain breathing techniques can be super helpful for on-the-spot interventions. So let's say a box breathing, It's going to get you into homeostasis, but maintain focus, which is a pretty powerful tool. It's used in the military a lot. Or something like step up, which would be like a hyperventilation breathing. That's going to get your body into a prime state for physicality, for performance. So these types of techniques where you can literally shift your physiology or shift your mindset, really powerful. One of the things we uniquely do in the app, kind of hard to do outside of it, is we'll do subliminal priming as well. So while you're looking at the screen, you'll be primed with positive imagery, which actually not only affects your positive mindset, but it also reduces cognitive fatigue. Pretty interesting science around it, but there's a lot of different ways that you can intervene really on the spot when you need to shift your mindset.
That's fascinating. That is especially when you talk about breathing, it's underrated, isn't it? Really, certainly from an athlete's point of view. And it's just like going to the gym. It's a skill essentially that you have to repeat and repeat and repeat, and then you learn and you get better and you improve. And then when you're in these difficult, challenging situations, you are able to take more control.
Absolutely. It doesn't take a lot of time. You could do a breathing modality that lasts 2 or 3 minutes, and that's enough. That's enough to shift your heart rate. We track HRV and other measures, and you can actually see those numbers improve in just a couple of minutes versus you do nothing. You keep cycling on whatever that negative input is. You're just going to get progressively in a worse state. Whereas if you can actually just interrupt that and not only feel in a better state in the moment, but actually stop that vicious cycle of negative self-talk or whatever the stress or anxiety is, you could actually potentially move past it and enter a new state ready for performance, like we call like a calm ready state.
Yeah, most definitely. And so many people that'll be listening to this will be really, really guilty of repeating the same mistakes time and time again and not being able to learn from those difficulties or not knowing how to learn to manage themselves better. So yeah, I'm hoping certainly this podcast will give them some insights, and obviously the technology that you've got as well can be a big benefit. So normally what I do is I end the podcast where I ask the guest for 3 key takeaways. I'm just wondering, because there's 2 of you there, maybe why don't you go for 1 key takeaway from the conversation each, and then I can add one on at the end.
I think just really highlighting the importance of being able to control your emotions and stay in sort of a calm, focused state whilst trying to perform. And obviously we've got a lot of technology built around that, but also just exploring some sort of triggers that work for you. So yeah, that would be my big sort of takeaway.
How about you, son?
Yeah, I would also say that if you do have more of a perfectionist or, kind of do or die mentality, just being a little bit easier on yourself, finding some ways to provide self-care, whether it's taking a few minutes every day off screens, doing a little breath work, doing a little gratitude practice, do something that will help you get perspective, because it's very easy to lose perspective when all you want is a single thing and you're kind of relentless about it. So I would just say, like, if you want longevity in your sport and you want to feel healthier, find something that'll give you a little bit of balance and perspective.
Yeah, no, I'd very much agree with that one. I'm going to add something as well for the listeners. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for 2 books that I've got in front of me, Flow Fundamentals, and then one which is called Play, How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination and Invigorates the Soul. Because as you say, I think, the perfectionist, as we talked about, can take themselves too seriously, and then mentally and physically, the body ends up out of sync and out of harmony. So being able to take some of the messages, certainly from these books, and allow yourself a little bit of freedom can only benefit and help your performances. So in terms of where the listeners can find you, should they want to reach out and have a conversation and learn more about your app, do one of you want to signpost them in the right direction?
They can definitely find us at rewirefitness.app. Check out the product. We have a free version people can download. And if they want to reach out to Ed or myself, we either Sun or Ed at rewire.team. We'd be happy to have a chat.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, big thank you for your time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and wish you the best of luck with the app and future business and health, of course, and finding a flow state.
All of the above. Thanks so much.
It was great to chat to Sun and to Ed about flow states. And You know, as a sports psychologist, it's very easy to get bogged down, I suppose, by the expectations that people place on themselves, that the distractions that they come up against, and the external factors, the outcomes, the results. And the same is true for an athlete. You can get so bogged down by these things, and it goes on to have a negative impact on your performance and sometimes your well-being too. But actually, the quick win can sometimes be simply finding out more about flow, about getting in the zone. It can be hugely, hugely powerful. Yes, it's solution-orientated, but by researching, by understanding more about these topics, about flow, and even about playfulness, it can really, really help you. Now, a lot of people that I work with are seriously motivated. That's right, they're highly driven. They're borderline perfectionists who want to do things to a very, very high standard. And getting into this flow state can be really, really difficult for them. They can be very, very self-critical and quite negative on occasions, or lots of occasions. And in the episode, we alluded to that there are a number of ways that you can get into flow state or peak performance state. Personally, I'm a big believer in visualization and in sports hypnosis. They can really help you. And I'd encourage you to look that up a little bit more because it really can harness this state. And also, and this is a little bit left field, last week I touched on the fact that I was involved in a 31-day cold immersion challenge in March to do with managing pain. And inadvertently, I've actually noticed by going into the cold, into an ice bath on a daily basis, that I'm put into a stress state and I have to do something about that. So breathing really, really helps me regulate my emotions, my emotional state. And then after a short period of time, I end up getting comfortable in the cold water, into a relaxed state. The muscles relax. And all I'm thinking about is the moment. I'm not in the past. I'm not in the future. It's simply all about the here and now. So it shares some characteristics there with the zone and flow experiences. I've gone on to dig a little bit deeper. I've checked out the work of some scientists in the field, Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Suzanne Schoberg, and they talk about this too. So, as I say, it's a little bit left field, but if you're curious, I would recommend that you look at their work, and you may even want to try and play around yourself with some cold water and see what it does for you. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you've enjoyed my musings. There's more of those, certainly about the cold at the moment, on Instagram, where I'm posting 3 or 4 videos each week with various different tips. This week, the topic is flow and the zone. Or you might want to sign up to the Mental Edge newsletter, which is full of resources, be that blogs, podcasts, books, aimed to help you maximize your performance levels too. Have a fantastic week ahead. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.